Donald Trump facing this deadline now approaching to secure that $464 million bond in the civil fraud judgment against him. Tonight, authorities have now taken their first steps and what the state attorney general in New York says she is ready to do. Here's Aaron Katursky.
Tonight, the pressure growing on Donald Trump as New York Attorney General Letitia James takes the first step towards seizing some of his assets if he can't meet Monday's deadline to post his $464 million bond. James filing documents to lay the groundwork to take over his golf course in a large estate in Westchester County. Trump's lawyers say he faces insurmountable difficulties in obtaining a bond. 30 insurance companies have turned him down because he doesn't have enough cash and they won't accept his properties as collateral. Trump says the Attorney General is trying to force him to sell his real estate at fire sale prices. And if and when I win the appeal, they would be gone.
We have a lot of cash and we have a great company, but they want to take it away.
But Trump's lawyers tell the court Trump doesn't have enough cash to secure the bond, calling it a practical impossibility. When I spoke to James just after the trial, she told me Trump has to pay.
Hey friends, John here. So this happening right now, a New York court has ruled that Trump must pay over $450 million for fraud. And if he doesn't, the state is prepared to seize his iconic properties, including Trump Tower, 40 Wall Street, and Mar-a-Lago. The legal system is finally catching up with a man who believed he was untouchable, threatening to dismantle the empire that defined his public persona for decades. The numbers are almost too staggering to wrap your head around. But let's try anyway, because this is the heart of the matter.
Does he have the money to pay this?
That's really not my business. If he does not have funds to pay off the judgment, then we will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court. And we will ask the judge to seize his assets.
We were sitting right across the street from one of those assets, Trump's 40 Wall Street. There's a building right just out the window.
Yes, I look at 40 Wall Street each and every day.
So 40 Wall Street, the apartment here at Trump Tower, all potential targets. If Trump cannot post a bond by the deadline of Monday, it's not like state officials are going to close down these buildings, but David, they could move to file liens to start to claim ownership, and that might give us a window into what some of Trump's assets are actually worth. David?
Aaron Katursky on this again tonight.
We're talking about a judgment that has ballooned to somewhere between $450 million and $465 million, and that's just the principal. The interest keeps accruing with every passing day, adding more weight to a burden that already seems impossible to bear. This isn't a parking ticket or a minor regulatory fine that you can shrug off and move past. This is a finding of fraud, a court's official declaration that Donald Trump and his company systematically lied about the value of their properties for years, manipulating numbers on loan applications.
Now a key ruling in the civil fraud case involving former President Donald Trump. A New York appeals court denying Trump's attempt to freeze his civil fraud judgment. That ruling means, for now, Trump is required to post a bond for hundreds of millions of dollars in the coming weeks. Our executive editorial producer, John Santucci, joining me now, along with our legal contributor, Shauna Lloyd. So, John, let's just talk about what broke here.
So, Kira, this is a very split decision. So two things were at issue here before the appellate court in New York. The first, the money, and then the control of the business. So let's start with the money. On the money, big loss for Donald Trump and the Trump family. What happened here, according to the Court of Appeals that just issued this ruling moments ago, is that Trump is on the hook to put up the bond for this. Now, he had offered Kira to put up $100 million in just the last couple of hours. That was rejected by the New York Attorney General. He said, look, you got to put up more. Court of Appeals agreed with that and said you need to put the bond up now. Now, they didn't specify, Kira, in this document, which our team is reading through.
Cheating banks and insurance companies out of honest business and building an empire on a foundation of deception. The case that has led to this extraordinary moment was brought by Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who has made no secret of her determination to see this through to whatever conclusion is necessary. She didn't just file a lawsuit and hope for the best. She built a case with mountains of evidence, depositions from Trump's own family members, financial documents that showed the systematic inflation of property values, testimony from executives who knew exactly what was happening and went along with it anyway. And when the judge, Arthur Engoron, rendered his decision, he didn't mince words. He didn't leave room for interpretation
as to how much that would be. So by default, it would mean the full amount. As you'll recall, that's $454 million. That includes all the interest that's been accrued since that ruling came down. The other part of it, Kira, is that Donald Trump is on a clock, meaning from last Friday when the ruling came down, it's 30 days out that he's got to pay. So he could pay it today, he could pay it tomorrow, but he's got to pay it before those 30 days are up unless there's another penalty. Now, that's the losing situation for Donald Trump. The slight win, if you will, if you'll recall, part of that ruling talked about the control of the company. The original judgment that came down from Arthur Ederwan, who's been looking at this, said that, listen, you and your children are out of business in New York. If you'll recall, Donald Trump, 3 years, Eric Trump and Don Jr., 2 years. This judgment from the Court of Appeals says that that is stayed for now. So for the moment, Donald Trump and his children can remain in control of the Trump Organization, Kira, but regardless, take all of that aside.
He simply said that Trump had committed fraud, plain and simple, and that the financial penalties would reflect the seriousness of that fraud. What most people don't understand about this situation is that it's not just about paying a fine and moving on with your life. This isn't like writing a check to the IRS or settling a lawsuit with a former business partner. This is a judgment that attaches to every major asset Trump owns in the state of New York, a legal web that covers his most prized properties and prevents him from using them the way he always has. Think about what it means to have a judgment lien on Trump Tower, the building that is essentially the physical manifestation of his brand, the place that represents everything he has built and everything he wants people to believe about him. Now imagine that building being tagged by the government, declared as collateral against a massive debt, and potentially subject to seizure if that debt isn't paid. The Attorney General has been remarkably direct about her intentions, refusing to engage in the careful, diplomatic language that politicians usually use when discussing legal matters. She has specifically mentioned 40 Wall Street in Lower Manhattan, saying she looks at it each and every day. And that's not a casual observation. That's a message. It's a threat. It's a signal that she is prepared to move forward with enforcement if Trump doesn't find a way to satisfy the judgment. And this is coming from someone who has the legal authority to actually make good on that threat, to initiate foreclosure proceedings, to seize properties, to auction them off to the highest bidder, to use the proceeds to pay down the massive debt that Trump now owes. The properties at risk are numerous and valuable, each one representing a different piece of Trump's sprawling real estate empire. There's Trump Tower itself, the iconic Fifth Avenue address that has become synonymous with his brand, the place where he descended that golden escalator to announce his first presidential campaign, the building that has been featured in countless photographs and television appearances over the years. Then there's 40 Wall Street, a massive skyscraper in the financial district that stands as a testament to Trump's ambitions in Manhattan real estate, a building that he has bragged about repeatedly, claiming it's one of the most valuable properties in the city. And there's also his golf club in Westchester County, a sprawling property where the wealthy and powerful gather to play and socialize, and his Seven Springs estate, a large property that he has owned for decades. The Westchester properties are particularly significant because they represent Trump's forays into luxury leisure, a different kind of real estate than the commercial towers, but equally important to his image as a man of wealth and success. His golf club in Briarcliff Manor is the kind of place that members pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to join, a venue for exclusive events and high-end networking that reinforces Trump's connection to the world of wealth and privilege. And then there's Seven Springs, a large estate in Bedford that he has owned since the 1990s. A property that has been featured in his financial disclosures and has been used as collateral in various business dealings over the years. All of these properties now carry judgment liens. All of them are legally tagged. All of them are potentially vulnerable if Trump can't find a way to pay. The optics of this situation are absolutely devastating for Trump, regardless of how the legal process ultimately unfolds. Imagine the image of a sheriff's sale in front of Trump Tower, government officials standing outside the building that bears his name, auctioning it off to pay a fraud judgment, a scene that would be replayed endlessly on television, splashed across newspaper front pages, and debated in every corner of the internet. That's the kind of image that defines a legacy, that creates a narrative that follows you for the rest of your life, that people remember long after the details of the legal case have faded from memory. The man who built an empire on the idea that he was the ultimate winner, the ultimate deal maker, the ultimate success story, watching his flagship properties being taken away by the government because he couldn't pay a fraud judgment. It's almost too devastating to contemplate. But it's not just about the money or even the optics. It's about what this moment says about the rule of law and whether anyone, even a former president, can truly be held accountable when they break the rules. For years, Trump has operated with a sense of impunity, believing that his wealth, his power, and his political connections would protect him from consequences, that he could bend the rules to his advantage and nothing would ever happen to him. But this judgment, this massive, crushing judgment, says something different. It says that the system can work, that courts can find the truth, and that even someone as powerful as Trump can be forced to face the consequences of their actions. That's why this case matters so much, not just for Trump personally, but for the entire country, because it's a test of whether our legal system can hold powerful people accountable when they break the law. The judge in this case, Arthur Engoron, didn't just decide that Trump had committed fraud, he laid out the specifics in excruciating detail, showing the world exactly how the deception had worked and why it was so damaging. Trump's penthouse in Trump Tower is a perfect example. The paperwork Trump submitted to banks and insurance companies claimed it was 30,000 square feet, a massive, sprawling space that would be one of the largest residences in Manhattan. But when the actual measurements were taken, it turned out to be closer to 10,996 square feet, less than a third of the size Trump had claimed, a difference that completely changed the value of the property and the loans he could secure based on that inflated value. That wasn't an honest mistake. That wasn't a rounding error. That was fraud, plain and simple. The kind of deliberate deception that banks rely on accurate information to make lending decisions. And when they're given false information, they're being cheated. The same pattern repeated itself across Trump's entire portfolio, property after property, building after building, each one being presented to lenders as significantly more valuable than it actually was. It wasn't just the size of properties that was inflated, it was also the income they generated, the occupancy rates, the potential for future growth. All of it was systematically manipulated to make Trump's empire look bigger and more successful than it really was. And when banks and insurance companies relied on those inflated numbers to approve loans and underwrite policies, they were being defrauded in real time, giving Trump access to capital he didn't deserve, on terms that were far more favorable than he should have received. That's the heart of the fraud, and that's why the judge didn't hesitate to impose such a massive penalty. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this is where the situation becomes truly unprecedented and unpredictable. Trump's lawyers have been arguing that he simply doesn't have the liquid cash to pay this judgment, that his wealth is tied up in real estate and other non-liquid assets, and that expecting him to come up with $450 million in cash is impractical, if not impossible. They've been going to court asking for relief, asking for delays, asking for some kind of accommodation that would allow Trump to avoid the immediate enforcement of the judgment while they continue to appeal the underlying decision. But the courts haven't been particularly sympathetic because the judge made it clear from the beginning that the defendants should have anticipated this outcome and should have prepared for it, whether by liquidating assets, securing financing, or finding some other way to satisfy the judgment. The challenge for Trump is that securing a bond of this size is incredibly difficult, especially given his current circumstances. He's a former president with ongoing legal entanglements. His financial situation is under scrutiny from multiple law enforcement agencies, and banks are naturally cautious about lending hundreds of millions of dollars to someone with a massive fraud judgment hanging over their head. The bond market is also nervous about the political implications. Lenders don't want to be seen as bailing out Trump. They don't want the negative publicity and the potential regulatory scrutiny that could come from doing business with someone whose financial dealings are being investigated at the highest levels. So Trump finds himself in a bind, unable to access his properties because of the judgment liens, unable to secure financing because of his legal entanglements, and watching the interest on his judgment grow larger every single day. The Attorney General, for her part, has been moving methodically through the legal process, filing judgment liens in every jurisdiction where Trump owns properties, creating a comprehensive web of legal claims that cover all of his most valuable assets. She filed in New York City for Trump Tower and 40 Wall Street. She filed in Westchester County for his golf club and Seven Springs. She filed in every county where Trump owns real estate, making sure that there was no escape, no property left unprotected, no asset that could be hidden from the judgment. This wasn't a casual or random filing, it was a carefully planned legal strategy designed to maximize pressure on Trump and make it impossible for him to simply ignore the judgment or try to outmaneuver the state with clever legal maneuvering. What's remarkable about this entire situation is how public the Attorney General has been about her intentions and how much she seems to relish the prospect of actually seizing Trump's properties. She hasn't hidden behind diplomatic language or vague statements about exploring legal options. She's said explicitly that she's prepared to seize his assets, that she looks at 40 Wall Street every day, that she's ready to enforce the judgment if necessary. This is a level of transparency that's rare in legal proceedings, and it's clearly designed to send a message not just to Trump, but to everyone watching, that no one, not even a former president, is above the law, and that New York will not back down from enforcing its legitimate legal claims. The legal mechanics of a seizure would be complex and time-consuming, but they are absolutely possible under New York law. The state would need to go back to court and seek permission to initiate foreclosure proceedings, a process that would involve additional legal hearings, notices to all parties with an interest in the properties, and an opportunity for Trump to challenge the enforcement. But if the court agrees that the judgment remains unpaid and that there's no legal basis for further delay, the foreclosure process could proceed, leading eventually to a sheriff's sale where the properties would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The proceeds from that sale would first go to satisfy any outstanding mortgages and other senior liens, and then the remaining money would go to pay down the judgment, reducing Trump's debt by whatever amount the sale generates. Of course, the process wouldn't be quick or simple. Trump's lawyers would fight every step of the way, filing appeals, seeking stays, raising every conceivable objection to delay the inevitable. They might argue that the judgment was improperly calculated, that the interest rate is too high, that the underlying decision was biased, any argument that could buy them time and potentially reduce the ultimate liability. But at the end of the day, if Trump doesn't find a way to pay the judgment, the courts will eventually authorize enforcement and the properties will be sold. The question is whether Trump can find another way out before that happens, whether he can tap into his network of wealthy supporters, whether he can negotiate some kind of settlement with the state, whether he can find a way to avoid the catastrophic outcome of actually losing his iconic buildings. The political dimensions of this case are impossible to ignore, and they've been front and center throughout the entire legal process. Trump has consistently characterized the case as a politically motivated witch hunt, arguing that the Attorney General, who is a Democrat, is using the legal system to attack him for partisan reasons. His supporters have embraced this narrative, seeing the judgment as another example of the establishment trying to take down a political outsider who threatens their power. But the legal evidence suggests otherwise, because the fraud that Trump was found to have committed isn't in dispute. The inflated values, the misrepresentations to banks, the systematic pattern of deception, all of this has been established in court and hasn't been successfully challenged by Trump's legal team. The counter-narrative from Trump's critics is that this is exactly what the rule of law looks like, that no one, not even a former president, is above the law, and that when powerful people break the rules, they should face consequences just like anyone else. They point to the massive amount of evidence that was presented at trial, the testimony from Trump's own executives, the documents that showed the systematic inflation, the clear pattern of deception that the judge found to be fraudulent. From this perspective, the judgment isn't a witch hunt, it's accountability. It's the system working as designed. It's a powerful signal that the wealthy and the powerful can't simply ignore the law and do whatever they want without facing consequences. The timing of all this is particularly significant because it's happening while Trump is actively running for president again, trying to position himself as the champion of the common man against a corrupt establishment that's rigged against him. The contrast between his public persona and the legal reality could hardly be more stark, because here is someone who presents himself as the ultimate successful businessman, the guy who knows how to make deals and build wealth, yet he's facing a judgment that says he built his empire on fraud and deception. It's a narrative that completely undercuts his campaign message, because if he's not really the brilliant businessman he claims to be, if his success was built on cheating and lying, then why should anyone trust him to run the country? The damage to Trump's brand goes far beyond the financial cost, even if he somehow manages to avoid actually losing his properties. The legal finding that he committed fraud is public and permanent. It's something that will show up in background checks, in media reports, in any situation where people are evaluating his business ethics and personal integrity. This is not the kind of stain that fades with time. It's a permanent mark on his reputation, a constant reminder that a court of law found that he lied and cheated to build his empire. And for someone whose entire public identity is built around being a successful businessman, that's an almost unimaginable blow to his most fundamental source of legitimacy. We're in entirely uncharted territory here, because never before in American history has a sitting president faced this kind of legal jeopardy, with judgment liens on their most famous properties and a state attorney general publicly threatening to seize them. The legal system has never had to grapple with the question of what happens when a president can't or won't pay a massive civil judgment because no previous president has ever been in this position. The courts are essentially making it up as they go along, adapting existing legal frameworks to a situation that was never contemplated when those frameworks were created. And that means the outcome is unpredictable, everything is on the table, and anything could happen. Trump's legal strategy has been to fight the judgment on multiple fronts, challenging the underlying finding of fraud, arguing that the penalty is excessive, trying to get the courts to reduce the amount or delay the enforcement. His lawyers have been working around the clock to find arguments that might convince appellate courts to intervene, to reverse or reduce the judgment, or at least to pause enforcement while they continue to fight. And to be fair, they've had some limited success. The appeals court did toss out some of the expanded penalties that the trial judge had imposed, suggesting that there might be more appellate wins to come. But the core of the judgment, the finding of fraud, and the basic financial liability has survived every challenge so far, and it's not clear that any appeals court will be willing to overturn it entirely. The Attorney General, meanwhile, has been preparing for the possibility of enforcement, making sure that all the legal paperwork is in order, that the judgment lines are properly filed, that there are no procedural gaps that Trump could exploit to delay or avoid enforcement. Her office has been methodical and thorough, anticipating every possible argument Trump might raise and building their case to withstand those challenges. She's made it clear that she's not bluffing, that she's prepared to take the next steps if Trump doesn't satisfy the judgment, and that she believes the law is on her side. And that creates real pressure on Trump because the threat isn't theoretical. It's backed by a legal apparatus that's already been activated and is ready to move forward. The question everyone is asking is whether the state will actually follow through with seizure, whether they will actually initiate foreclosure proceedings and force the sale of Trump's properties. And the honest answer is that no one knows for sure, not even the Attorney General herself, because so much depends on what Trump does in the coming weeks and months. If he finds a way to pay the judgment, either by securing a bond or liquidating other assets, then the threat of seizure becomes moot. The judgment liens are released and the properties are safe. But if he can't pay, if he continues to insist that he doesn't have the money and can't get a bond, then the Attorney General will have to decide whether to pull the trigger and start the foreclosure process. There are powerful reasons for the state to hesitate before actually seizing Trump's properties because it would be a massive political controversy and would create a spectacle that would dominate the news for weeks or months. Trump and his supporters would frame it as political persecution, a corrupt establishment using the legal system to destroy a political opponent. And that narrative would resonate with many people who already distrust the legal system. The state would face accusations of overreach, of trying to destroy a political enemy, of abusing their power for partisan purposes. And those accusations would have some credibility because it's hard to separate the legal case from the political context, especially when the Attorney General has been so public and so aggressive in her pursuit of Trump. But there are also powerful reasons for the state to follow through, because the alternative would be to signal that Trump is above the law, that his wealth and power can protect him from consequences that would befall anyone else. If New York backs down and doesn't enforce the judgment, it sends a message that the legal system is fundamentally unequal, that the wealthy and powerful can buy their way out of accountability, that the law is only for the little people. That's not a message that the Attorney General wants to send, especially when she's built her career on the idea that everyone is equal before the law. So she's in a difficult position, balancing the political risks of enforcement against the principle that justice should be blind and that no one should be above the law. The financial pressure on Trump is only going to increase as time passes, because the interest on the judgment is compounding and the legal fees are mounting, and every day that goes by makes the situation more difficult and expensive. His properties are effectively frozen by the judgment liens. He can't sell them or borrow against them without addressing the judgment first, and that restricts his ability to raise the money he needs to satisfy the debt. It's a classic catch-22. He needs to access his assets to pay the judgment, but the judgment prevents him from accessing his assets. And that's exactly the situation that the Attorney General's legal strategy was designed to create, putting Trump in a box where he can't win, where every option leads to another dead end. The ultimate outcome of this case will be determined by a combination of legal rulings, financial calculations, and political calculations. And it's impossible to predict exactly how it will all shake out. Trump might find a way to raise the money, whether through wealthy supporters, foreign investors, or some kind of creative financial arrangement. He might secure a ruling from an appellate court that reduces the judgment or delays the enforcement, buying him more time to figure out a solution. The state might decide to negotiate a settlement, perhaps allowing Trump to pay the judgment over time or to satisfy it with non-cash assets. Or the state might actually follow through with foreclosure, setting the stage for an unprecedented seizure of a former president's properties. What's clear is that this situation is not going to resolve itself quickly or quietly because the stakes are simply too high for everyone involved. For Trump, it's about preserving his brand and his legacy, the empire he built over decades, the image of success that he's crafted so carefully. For the state of New York, it's about enforcing the rule of law and sending a message that no one is above accountability. And for the country as a whole, it's about watching how the legal system handles the extraordinary challenge of holding a former president accountable, watching whether the courts will have the backbone to see this through to its logical conclusion, and watching whether Trump will finally face the consequences of his decades of deception and fraud. We're about to find out exactly how this story ends, because the clock is ticking, the pressure is building, and there's no escape from the judgment that now hangs over every building that bears his name.